Welcome to the Lo-Fi Lighting Workshop. Yay! The sun is really extremely difficult to work in, and you'll know if you've ever shot any kind of day exterior stuff, without a bunch of complicated grippage, it can be really difficult to get a good, clean, usable image that either doesn't have your talent squinting in the sunlight or doesn't have them super underexposed while the background's properly exposed, or what could be even worse is, thank you.
You want me to do those too?
Yeah, if you would. What could be even worse is if you have your background overexposed just so that you can have your foreground properly exposed. So one of the things that I wanted to incorporate in this workshop is one of our high-end cinema cameras. So we're going to be using a Red Epic. And we have a little monitor set up in Video Village behind all the dark cloths over there. And that's so you guys can really see what the camera sees and essentially what we're recording. So we'll do a little bit out in the bare naked sunlight, and I'll show you some super basic steps with just little stuff that you can fit in your car, like bounce boards and reflectors and things like that. And then we'll move up to the bigger stuff, and you'll see kind of what a difference it makes, and whether or not it's even worth it for your scale of production, whatever that may be. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the camera over for now. I'll show you the standard kind of lighting that you're going to be tempted to do because you think it looks better on camera, and that is when the light is hitting your subject from the front. Like right now, if the camera were pointing at me and the sun's right there, it's going to make me squint. Or your actors are going to want to do like you're doing and shield their eyes. You can't have them do that because even though it may be realistic, it doesn't look good on camera. So let's stick him over here so he's squinting in the light. There we go. Sure. Yeah, and I'm just going to pick him up and move him when I need to move him. All right. We lost his luscious hair. Let me just make some adjustments here. Like our color temperature, we are shooting outside, so it's going to be 5600, daylight balanced. Now, I'm going to remove my mask if it's okay with all of you since we're outside, and you're going to be able to hear me better. All right. Excellent. So just making some adjustments for the color temperature here. At that angle, you see that he's definitely getting hit on the side with the sun. If he were rotated like that, he'd be a little bit more facing the sun. It was like there. And although that works really well for camera because it's really well exposed, your actor is going to be squinting like crazy. So we really want to avoid that. So what are some easy things that we can do? Usually the easiest is going to be putting the sun behind your talent. Use the sun as a backlight. And it works really well for a couple different reasons. So I'm just going to scoot him over. Now, if I hit the bottom button on our red monitor over here, it shows me false color, which is our exposure meter. And it shows that all of that is red. The sky is completely overexposed. So I'm going to close my iris down until the sky stops being overexposed, and I can't. I cannot go down enough for it to not overexpose the sky. So I'm going to lower my ISO. Ultimately, I'm going to end up cheating and playing with the shutter angle, just because that's going to be the quickest and easiest way to do this. But that doesn't matter for the purposes of our demonstration here. Well, he is kind of moving around in the wind. So I was hoping by having Manny out here, it would be less finicky than working with an actual human. But believe it or not, he's got more of a mind of his own than some people on campus. But none of y'all, because y'all are the smart ones that are here for this workshop.
Isn't it kind of hot? I don't know why he's not here.
Yes. The only reason I don't have his hair on is because it's going to blow off.
No, I'm just saying if there's a bald actor.
If there's a bald actor, yeah, you're going to want to make sure your makeup artist is nearby to apply powder generously onto the head. Yeah. So right now, we have no red in our image. That means we're not overexposed. So we're right on the money. But if we take a look at our monitor in Video Village over here, you can get a better idea of what the exposure looks like. Feel free to come around on the inside over here and take a peek. Now, while the background is fairly well exposed, he feels pretty dark, right? So there's a couple things that we're going to want to do with him. So first, and this is the easy one, we're just going to use a simple bounce board. So this is our first line of defense. So you're going to want to see where the sun's coming from. You're going to catch it with the white board and bounce it back onto his face. Now, it depends what angle we're going for. If we're going for a relatively wide angle, I have to be kind of further back with the bounce board for it to not be seen in the frame. But even then, just seeing it with your eyeball, you can see where it makes a difference. But if I'm on a tighter shot, if I'm on a medium or if I'm on a close-up, I can get right up on him like this. And that really helps. If you look at the monitor in Video Village over there, you can really see how much that helps the image. And the cool thing, there's with, without, with, without. But it gives it a little bit of contrast too, because when the bounce board is getting light on this side of his face, this side over here maintains a little bit of shadow. So it creates a little bit of separation, and it gives you a little bit of contrast, which is kind of difficult to do when you're working with this much light, to have contrast in your image. Good contrast. Like this right now is bad contrast because he's so dark. But let's say he's really dark skinned, or he's wearing dark clothing and we really want to make sure that his shirt pops too. And a white board just isn't enough. You can also use what's called a shiny board. And the shiny board is exactly what you think it would be based on the name. It's just very reflective. It can also be called a reflector, but when it's rigid like that, usually they refer to it as a shiny board. So when I tilt this up and hit it with the sun, you can really see that it's kind of a little bit more harsh. Like the shadows that it creates are a little bit harder, because when it's just a plain white board, it's very soft light that I'm bouncing back on him, so it kind of wraps around his face. Here, it's almost like I'm shining a spotlight on him so that the shadows that it creates, like from his nose, for example, is a little bit more harsh. And you can really see it, like the closer I get to him, like, look at that, off, on, off, on. You can really see the difference that it makes. I just realized, even though Rima told me to record, I didn't record any of this yet, so I'm hoping she's not going to hate me. All right, now the red is rolling. Cool. So, before I get too far, let me format the card, because I suspect it had stuff on it already. There we go. Excellent. Now we're rolling. All right. So that's how to deal with when the sun is directly behind your talent. You have to make sure that it's angled just right, because there's kind of just a little narrow beam of light that we're hitting him with when we're using a reflector like this, or a shiny board. Versus, even though this has, because this is just a piece of insulation you can get from Home Depot. It's got advertisement on the back of it. But this can also work as just, essentially just like a plain white board. It gives you the same effect. They used to make it at Home Depot where it was pure silver on one side, pure white on the other with no advertisements. But they stopped selling it, so you can get the same stuff from Film Tools or any Expendables house, but they'll charge you like 5 times as much because it's official film gear. Whereas the exact same stuff is sold at Home Depot.
Kind of like moving blankets and sound absorption blankets.
Exactly. Furniture pads are the same way. A lot of the lights that they sell there, like work lights. When I was in film school, we used to buy cheap 500-watt work lights that they would sell like over in the paint department. And those were just as effective as any of the cinema lights that we were using. I mean, then again, this was 20 years ago. And now they're selling the LED ones there. But you have to watch out for the cheap LED lights. This is outside the scope of this lighting workshop, but the cheap LEDs, like they sell at places like Home Depot like that, they will flicker on camera. So you have to be very careful, because that's why the LED lights that are made specifically for filmmaking are so expensive, is because they're specifically engineered so that they don't flicker. And that's whether you're shooting 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, or all the way up to 120 frames per second if you're doing slow motion, stuff like that. They're made not to flicker. So now, I want to go ahead and I'm going to bring him back over into the directly sunny position. And I want to show you one more thing that we can do on a small scale. So this really only works for a close-up, and it's going to simulate kind of what we're able to do with that big piece of diffusion over there. And this is something that can be found in one of these nifty 5-in-1 reflectors. Now, you didn't know that you're getting anything cool just for attending a workshop today, but every single one of you gets to leave with one of these. So, yay! Tell your friends, these workshops are actually fun and worth coming to. So, these are called 5-in-1 because they have the ability to be 5 different things. So the setting that I have it on right now is just pure silver. Then there's one that has crisscrossing lines of silver and gold. So if you're wanting to kind of warm up the sunlight that's hitting your talent, if you're simulating something like magic hour, or certain darker skin tones really look good with golden light, you're going to want to use something like that. And you can also unzip it. If you turn it inside out, on one side you have pure gold, which is really good for simulating magic hour, or again, bouncing or reflecting light up on darker skin tones. And then you have one that is just white. And this is basically, it's a little bit shinier than a normal bounce board would be. This is akin to this material over here, which is known as Ultra Bounce. And we'll go into this shortly. But yeah, you can just turn this inside out, put it over your inner part here, and then that gives you 4 of your 5-in-1 options. This is your 5th option right here. And this is basically a silk. This is just like the silks that you guys have used in Film 1 or any of the film production classes to diffuse the lights. But instead of mounted onto a hard metal frame and being clipped in front of a light fixture, this is something that you can move around, you can hold. It folds up conveniently for travel. But the reason why I brought this out is because if we put this in between the sun and our dummy here, it diffuses the light that's hitting him. It's not quite shade, because it's not like we're putting something completely solid in front of him. Sunlight is still passing through, but what it's doing is it's diffusing that sunlight, it's wrapping around, it's softening, and it's just being reduced. But you'll notice it cuts down the amount of light on our subject quite a bit. So if you're using this, you're probably also going to be wanting to use a bounce board or a shiny board on the other side just to get a little bit more light onto your subject there. Because if you do this and you expose your camera to the background, your talent's going to feel a little bit dark. Kind of almost like as if he was on the other side over there where he's being backlit. He's going to feel a little bit dark, so you'll need to pick up a little bit of light on the other side of his face. But this is a totally viable option if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you don't have any grip gear like C-stands to hold any kind of diffusion, or you don't want to set up a big complicated rig like that. You can just pop one of these out of the trunk of your car and have somebody hold it up. And this is perfect for close-ups and medium shots. Look how far down his chest I'm able to get with this. You can get a really nice medium shot and have it be fairly well diffused just by using one of these reflectors. So, what's the point of that big monstrosity over there? That's if you want to get a wider shot that isn't just a close-up and isn't just a medium shot on your subject. If you want to be able to get head to toe, if you have 3 or 4 people standing around and you're wanting to do a day exterior, rather than have them all with the harsh sunlight in their face or at their backs, we can have them under diffusion like that, and it solves the problem of diffusing the light hitting everybody. So if you were here earlier and when we were setting up, you heard us referring to this as tabletop. That's the configuration that it's in right now because it's completely flat on the top. So if you were to look at this like we are miniatures or dolls and we are now in the land of giant furniture, that is like a big old table and it's just flat on the top. The reason why we had it set up this way is for 2 reasons. One, it's the safest configuration that I can do with it windy like this right now, where the wind isn't going to pick it up and carry it down the block. As it is, we still had to stake it into the ground and weigh it down with a bunch of sandbags just to prevent it from going crazy. But This is also probably one of the most useful versions of it that you can do, because let's say we do have a group of 3 or 4 actors. They're standing around. We're shooting a scene at a high school, and everybody's waiting around for their one friend that was in detention, and they're waiting for her to get out so that they can tell her whatever happened that day. You have 3 or 4 of them gathered together. This is the perfect lighting setup for it. So with that said, we're going to pick up Manny. We're going to move him over there underneath the diffusion, and then we're going to look and see how nice it looks. So the real trick in a situation like this is not seeing our tabletop diffusion. So what I'm going to do is move him a little bit closer to the edge. So the diffusion is still hitting him kind of from the knees up. And he's still technically being backlit, so we'll do it from the other side as well. But okay, so unfortunately I'm gonna have to raise the sticks. So Rima, would you mind coming over? And let's loosen these. All right, 1, 2, 3, up. Okay, there we go. Excellent, thank you. So when the tripod was lower like that, I had to tilt up to see the mannequin's head. And when I tilt up, I see this diffusion rag above him. So now that we're a little bit higher, I can tilt down, and there we go. Now this is a medium shot basically, so this isn't as wide as I was describing we could use this diffusion setup to get, but we'll get there. Here we go, just getting him in focus. So first thing you're going to notice is even though the sun is at his back, the light really wraps around his head nicely. And if you go inside the Video Village tent over there and look at the monitor, you have a better idea of what the camera's seeing. Now there's not a single thing in this image that's overexposed. The sky isn't overexposed. The reflections of the sun on the cars is not overexposed. The whole image is right in the middle. And if you look at the bottom left of your monitor over there, you're going to see little, what looks like mountains. It's a diagram, it's a histogram showing red, green, and blue mountains. And everything is basically towards the center of that histogram. That's what's known as keeping the mountains in the middle. If the mountains were on the right side, it would be overexposing. And if the mountains were on the left side, it would be underexposing the image. But by keeping them in the center, we're pretty properly exposed. Now you look at it and you see, well, the grass is brighter behind them, the sky is brighter, the cars are brighter. What can we do to bring it up? Well, same thing as we can do when we're out in the direct sun. We'll either use a bounce board or a shiny board, and we can just bring in a little bit more just to kind of bring them alive a little bit. So there's without, there's with, and I can even get closer since we're kind of tight on them. That's nice and close right there. That's bringing it out, bringing it in. And there, that way he matches his background a little bit more. One thing that you're going to be tempted to do, I wasn't recording again, sorry Rima. I can even do this from a distance, which is nice with the shiny board part. But one thing you're going to be really tempted to do, especially if you don't have any of this kind of gear with you when you're out in the field, is you're going to be tempted to, hey, let's throw our talent in the shade. Let's throw the actor in the shade because that way they won't squint. They'll be nice and cool. We don't have to worry about them getting sunburnt. But even if they're in the shade, chances are part of your image in the background is in the sun. And let's say that this little canopy isn't here, this diffusion isn't here, but instead this is the shade of a big leafy tree. And you want to put your talent underneath it. Well, unfortunately, your talent is getting the benefit of the shade, but the background is going to be overwhelming. So even if you were doing something like this in a semi-shady environment, you're still going to need to use bounce boards, reflectors, or even diffusion like this to take what light is coming in and then just wrapping it around your talent. But really, I would recommend just not putting your talent in the shade for the sake of keeping them cool. As much as it sucks, bring them out in the open. Whether it's an interview, whether it's a narrative, whether it's, you know, something you're doing for, you know, whether it's more something for the internet or for TV, or whether it's something that's meant to be more cinematic, bring them out into the full light, because it's really, your image is going to benefit greatly from it. So, so don't skimp on it. And I know, like I said at the beginning, the sun is the absolute hardest thing to work in to actually look nice. But even just the simple little tricks that I showed you out in the bare daylight is better than nothing. So with that in mind, we're going to flip the mannequin around, and then I'll bring the camera out to the other side, and then you'll see what it looks like with the sun hitting from the front, but with the diffusion on his side. So now we have a much wider perspective, but of course we see some of the stuff that we have set up here in the background. We see the rope coming down, holding the tabletop up. Now, if it's not a windy day, you don't need to worry about using rope and stakes and all these sandbags. You're still going to want to use sandbags on the stands that are holding your diffusion up. But if it's not a windy day, you don't need all the rope involved. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this shot a little bit wide just so that you guys can see what it looks like. Now we're like thighs up. That would be kind of known as like a cowboy shot. And if we wanted to get even wider, the trick is changing our diffusion so that it's no longer flat on the top like a table. We would angle it upwards and bring it further back. That way we don't have to worry about seeing that side of the diffusion down in our shot. That whole end will be lifted up. We can have the diffusion further back. We can easily be head to toe for several people. The only thing is, if you're too wide, and you'll see this in TV and movies all the time when they're doing exterior shots, if it's super wide, you can see on the ground, there's our diffusion frame, our 12 by 12 in the shadow, in the form of a shadow on the ground there. On bigger studio films, they'll use frames even bigger than this. This is only 12 foot by 12 foot. They'll use ones that are 20 feet by 20 feet. They'll have ones attached to a crane that's 100 feet wide by 20 feet deep kind of thing. They'll have really, really crazy, crazy big ones. And even on big budget movies and TV shows, you'll see shadows of those diffusion frames on the ground. So now let's look at our talent, Mr. Manny here. The light is definitely, the sun is still hitting him directly, or I mean from the front, not directly because it's going through the diffusion. But look at how nice and diffused the light is, how it's curving around his face. We're not getting any harsh shadows or anything. I'm even going to go ahead and try putting his hair back on. See if the wind plays nicely with us for a little bit here. But yeah, take a look at it in the monitor there and really see, if I move him facing the sun a little bit more, how nice it turned out. Now, of course, let's say you want a little bit more contrast. You see we have a little bit of shadow on the left side of his face. Let's say we wanted to fill that in a little bit. And let's say, again, we're not using our small arsenal of tips and tricks. We're not going to be using these little guys. I want to use this big beast here. So I raise this up ever so slightly. So this is Ultra Bounce. I was talking about this when I was showing you the white side of the 5-in-1 reflector. So by having a big piece like this, thank you, you won't have to dedicate a human to hold a bounce board or a reflector or anything like that. Do you guys remember the term for when you're just hand holding something that could be rigged up into a stand or a light stand or a C-stand or something like that? It's Hollywooding. If you're just holding it by hand, it's Hollywooding. Now I'm lowering this so that that end actually touches the ground. That way we have more points of contact and it won't blow away as easily. We can even make little adjustments just to kind of really kind of shape and angle the light. And if we really want it to bounce and be even more effective, we can bring it further out so it's getting hit by the direct sun and not from the light that's being already diffused from this. So see, now we have this little area here that's catching the direct sunlight. If I raise this up, that gives me the ability to spin it around a little bit. So And you'll really feel it too, like on his clothes. Like his black shirt now, all of a sudden looks bluish. It doesn't even look as black anymore because it's being illuminated a lot more. And one of the big keys is something that's super easy to avoid. Like if you don't want to have to worry about your subject being too dark when you're doing exterior days, work with your wardrobe or your costume designer and make sure that they're not wearing black for that. Same thing if you're doing a dark interior shot. Try not to have your cast members wearing black because then they're gonna disappear into the background. Now obviously here we see that big piece of ultra bounce that we just flew in the shot. But if I were to walk this in closer for a medium, we wouldn't see it at all. Or if we had the space, we could bring it further back too. So there's a lot that we can do just to get it out of the way. But I figured since we took the time to set this thing up, I wanted to kind of show you what it was capable of doing. Now there's one other thing that I haven't shown you guys the concept of that's really interesting, and it's something that a lot of people just kind of don't do when they do their exterior lighting. And that, are you still shooting on that camera? Okay. And that is the concept of negative fill. So you've seen us use bounce boards and reflectors and bright objects to bounce light onto our subject. But what happens if we were to take the black side of this ultra bounce and instead turn it around and face black toward our subject? What would that do? What that's going to do is it's actually going to make that side of them darker. It's going to reduce the amount of light that's bouncing, the ambient light that's coming from over there, and it's going to completely cut it down. So what it's going to do is make it even more contrasty. So would we do that for something like a comedy or an action adventure movie, which is usually super bright and what's known as high key lighting? Probably not. But if we were doing something dramatic, or if we were doing something like horror or suspense, something like that, then we would want as much contrast and as much darkness in the image as possible. Even in a day exterior, in the middle of the day with bright sunlight, you still got to find ways to bring darkness and contrast into the image. So, with that said, and this is going to be a small feat of engineering, Rima, will you help me take this and flip it 180 degrees? So now instead of bouncing that light up on that side of our talent, now we are completely reducing the light. And again, if you were to go in and take a look in Video Village over there, you're going to see now all of a sudden our image is a lot more contrasty, it's a lot more dramatic, it's a lot spookier. Now maybe our main actor here is standing at a graveyard looking at the grave of his son or daughter or something like that. And now it's a lot more dramatic looking than it was before. And you don't even need something as big as this. You can have just a single flag. Or you can have like those floppies that we have over there around Video Village. You could have one of those, somebody just holding that up. It doesn't have to be a big 6 foot by 6 foot rag in a frame like that. And just so you know, just a little vocabulary, any kind of diffusion or bounce, anything like that, that we set up in these frames, the cloth part is known as a rag. Just like a cloth rag, like a dish rag kind of thing. It's just kind of a nickname, a set name for it, this a rag. So no matter what kind of cloth this is, whether it's ultra bounce, whether it is like a black cloth like duvetine, like that material's made out of, or whether it's diffusion like this, which kind of feels like the material of a shower curtain, no matter what kind of cloth it's made out of, it's called a rag. And the frames, the pipes that are built together to suspend these pieces of cloth are all known as frames. This is a 6 foot by 6 foot frame. This is a 12 foot by 12 foot frame. And if you're interested in using this for any of your projects, generally it becomes available in film production 2 and above. So for the advanced level production classes. Also, if you're really interested in this kind of stuff, you can take the cinematography class and you'll have the opportunity to use these not only for day exteriors like this, but you'll find out how this kind of material can be really useful for setting up a nighttime exterior scene too. But with that, you're going to need some electric lights. You're going to need something other than the available light. Because all we're doing today is we're just talking about harnessing the power of the sun. Other big productions, what they'll do is they'll have these big daylight balance lights called HMIs. And they will bring those in if we need, instead of bouncing a light or reflecting a light, they'll bring a light fixture over and they'll just blast it. Or if they're shooting on the side of a building that's really shady, like what I was saying not to do because then the background will be overexposed, for them to combat that, they'll bring in giant light fixtures and they'll just blast that shady area. So it'll still look a little bit darker like it's in the shade, but it won't be nearly as shady as what real shade is. Basically, it'll look like this, kind of like a light version of shade. But if you're going to be using this kind of gear to effectively set up a nighttime exterior shot, you're probably going to be using the white part of that ultra bounce. You're going to be putting it up in the air at a 45-degree angle, and you're going to be taking a big HMI light, bouncing it off of that, and it'll spread into some beautiful looking moonlight. And then, of course, if you need diffusion, you could soften it even more. But the possibilities are really kind of endless. For the most part, that's the basics of what I wanted to go over with you today. Do you have any questions? Do you want to be hands-on with the equipment?
Would it be off topic to talk about lighting up night exteriors?
Not at all. So what would you like to know?
Well, I'm just curious what you could do to get away with not using a generator if you're shooting in a pretty much small location.
So what I would recommend doing, we have some great lighting that's completely battery operated. So if you're not doing an entire overnight of night shots, let's say you're doing, it's wintertime like right now, and you're doing a 12-hour day, and you know you want to get a couple of night exterior shots. Maybe you schedule that day to be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. so you get the majority of your day during the daylight, and then you have 2 or 3 hours after it gets dark to shoot your night exteriors. That way you can justify using battery-only fixtures. So I don't have one out here to show you, but we can do an entirely separate workshop on night exterior lighting or interior lighting if we want to, because those kind of warrant their own time to talk about them accurately. But our light panel Gemini takes 2 gold mount batteries, these Anton Bauer batteries like the ones that's on this camera here, and it could last for about 2 hours off of those 2 batteries, and it can go any color in the spectrum. It's already a big soft source. If you put a soft box on it that comes with the fixture, it can get even bigger and softer, which is kind of what you want for moonlight. What I was describing is throwing up the ultra bounce and then using an HMI, which is a very spotty light source. Like the Fresnels, it's very focused to bounce off of there to spread out. If you're using a Gemini, you just have to put the Gemini up high, have your softbox on it, and it'll cover a nice big area. It's dimmable. It's LED, so it doesn't ever get hot or anything like that. You don't have to worry about the light bulb blowing out. And it doesn't draw much energy, so you don't need to rent a generator. But if you did have a generator, it would last all day with that fixture on it because it's just that power efficient.
But if you can manage just like a
So-
for a 4 or 5 hour shoot, you just bring
Extra batteries, yeah.
charge it for, okay.
And just plan on every 90 minutes changing the batteries.
Gemini's come in real handy. Like that's a worthy investment.
I wholeheartedly agree. And they're about $3,500, which is a little pricey, but it's really worth it in the long run. And as long as you're here, make use of what we have. So, for example, just this past January, I was shooting a night exterior in the middle of the desert. Absolute zero lighting from anywhere. I used a Gemini as my primary source of light for my moonlight. I had a couple little battery-powered lights, like the ones that we gave out for the Lo-Fi Film Festival last year. And we had those set as like little fiery flicker things to kind of simulate some torches around in the background. And then we had a couple battery-powered tube lights that we just kind of hid around in the background to illuminate certain little bits of, all right, here's a cactus here, here's a little log over here, just to kind of have stuff popping in the background. And then we had one 1 foot by 1 foot little LED panel that had a battery on it as well, that we would fly around if we needed a little backlight behind a character. And we did 2 people talking in front of a campfire. And for the wide, we actually had the campfire lit, so practical, and it was sending up actual firelight onto their faces. But when we went in for all the close-ups, because we didn't want the sound, the popping and crackling, to affect the sound, we had this little battery-powered tube light that could simulate fire flicker. We had that, and it was flashing on the actors' faces. So the sound was nice and clean, had the exact same look, and we basically were just using 3 decent-sized fixtures. The Gemini with 2 batteries, the little light panel for a backlight with 1 battery, and then the rechargeable little tube. And we're going to be getting tubes, those same types of tubes here for students to use. We don't have them currently. All the light tubes that we have are ones that you have to plug into electricity. but we are getting the battery powered ones here, so you guys will be able to use those maybe by the end of this semester.
New age LEDs.
Yes, I love LEDs so much. I'm depending on them way too much now. But yeah, so that's how I would do like a small nighttime exterior. And you can do even bigger ones, but you would probably want to have multiple Geminis to spread out. Like if you wanted to light this whole building and do a really big wide shot of it, I would probably have one Gemini up as high as it could go, hitting this side of the building, one on the other side, hitting that other side of the building, and then just use that as a big general wash of light. And then whatever light is actually naturally emanating from the building, like the fluorescence, would just kind of fill it in a little bit. And then kind of just go from there. And then when you go in for close-ups, maybe use a little panel just to give a little bit of love to your talent. But for a big wide, I would just use those two, and I could light up a whole building. You know, or if you're doing like a small neighborhood scene and you wanted to light like a little section of like 2 houses or something like that, probably one Gemini could do 2 houses. But just experiment with it. Yeah, like if you have a specific lighting setup for a project you want to do here, see if you can check out the gear for the weekend. We'll check out gear for you guys to test if it's for an upcoming project for school. Yeah, you know, we'll give it to you guys the weekend before so you can do some lighting tests, and that's fine. I highly recommend it because the more familiar you are with this stuff, the more you know what it's capable of doing.
It'd be daunting if you don't.
Exactly. Like most people don't check out this 12 by 12 frame, and I'll admit it's a pain in the butt to set up. Like if you got here early, you saw how troublesome it was just to set up so that it wouldn't blow away. But when you see the effects and what it does, and if we're doing an entire day of shooting like a bunch of people sitting around talking on the grass or whatever, and we don't want to have, we could do it all day long because no matter where the sun is in the sky, as it moves throughout the day, it's coming down through that tabletop diffusion, and it's basically hitting the talent the same way. So the lighting stays consistent the entire day. We've even used this to keep the camera and the talent dry when it's raining. Like we've used this in a rainy exterior environment too. So it's super useful. So it's daunting, but if you haven't had any experience with it, you wouldn't know what it is, and you wouldn't know to ask for it, and you wouldn't know what a benefit it is to actually have on set. So that's the whole point of having workshops like these, so that you can expand your knowledge of stuff that you don't get to use every day.
I was going to ask you any tricks to mimic that type of setup, just like you were talking about. I find that very valuable.
So yeah, that same shoot that I did in the desert, we did a lot of day exteriors. Some days, 0 wind whatsoever, and it was beautiful for both sound and for our diffusion. But I also knew that I wasn't going to have enough room to transport in all of our gear, and we weren't going to have enough grips to rig a whole setup like this. So what I did is I just brought 2 regular C-stands, a bunch of grip clips, and just the cloth, just the rag itself. And we ran up the 2 C-stands as tall as they would go, and we clipped the rag to it, and we just had one person standing on each C-stand. And then it was just standing straight up like that, so that the sun was hitting through it and then casting the diffusion down onto the talent. Instead of going tabletop, we went straight up like a sail or a kite. So the trick was not to allow the wind to catch it. We were only able to do that on the days where the wind wasn't really, really bad. The other days, we kind of made the actors suffer and just like, all right, sorry, the sun's gonna be in your eyes. We're only gonna make you like force them to stay open as long as we're rolling, and we'll call cut as soon as we can, so that it isn't too terrible. And I hate doing that to actors. Obviously, you want to try to treat them right and give them the best possible scenario that they can perform in. But sometimes you got to do what is necessary. What's up?
Okay, so let's say you don't really have any friends, but you still want to film a lot of stuff, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah, then you go the easy route, like I was showing you with the 5-in-1 reflector. And the disc, and you use the bounce board, that kind of thing. If you have one other person, that's all you really need. But let's say you don't have that other person, get a C-stand.
Right.
Because what the C-stand can do is it can clamp on, you can get what's known as a platypus clamp, and it'll clamp onto, Rima, do you want to grab one? Thank you. It'll clamp onto whether it's a reflector, or it's a bounce board, or a shiny board. It is literally designed with one purpose in mind, to clamp onto a flat object and hold it in place. So you're going to put that at the end of a C-stand arm, find the right angle for it to hit your talent, and then you're good to go. So Yeah, and then you can do basically everything by yourself. But then you still need somebody to be in front of the camera. But if you're going to be in front of the camera, just set up a shot that you know looks good. Get a mannequin. No, I'm teasing. But this is a platypus clamp. So it's got a baby pin on one side, which can go into a gobo head. And this is basically just like a pair of vice grips. And then you could put, whether it's a piece of foam core, or whether it's one of those circular reflector discs, or whether it's the thick foam shiny board, you just put it in here, clamp it down, and then attach it to your C-stand, and you're good to go. So, I will demonstrate. Let's say we wanted to do it with the shiny board here. So, first thing I'm going to do is clamp my platypus to it. Okay, and let's say I'm going to take down our neg fill right here, and I'm going to use this rolling stand as a big C-stand. So this basically just looks like a C-stand, but with a big knuckle on it.
Hang in there, okay? Good to see you.
So we'll just attach this arm to it. So we'll have that down there, and then at the other knuckle is where we're going to insert our platypus clamp. So we're going to use it to the same effect, basically, to shine some light up on our boy here. So I just insert the baby pin from the platypus clamp into there, and I can move this arm as needed. I can loosen this knob right here to turn that whole top section. And this is something that you can use a lot too. Like, let's say you want to simulate, like, before they made LEDs that had super easy red and blue flashing lights to simulate like cop cars and stuff like that, what they would do is they would have lights bouncing off of a shiny board like this that they would kind of spin back and forth. And the way that it would oscillate would kind of look like the old-fashioned style kind of cop cars where the lights would spin around. But you could also use that if you were doing what's called poor man's process. Is that starting to pick up?
Yeah.
Thank you. Whenever a human is holding it down, it's known as blood bagging, in addition to sandbagging, because the human becomes a human sandbag at that point. Thank you, Chris. All right. So the idea of poor man's process is, instead of renting a very expensive process trailer, which is what you would do if you were going to be shooting a car scene, which is a super low flat trailer that you pull a car up onto. Usually there's room on there to attach a couple lights, to have a camera and an operator on there and everything. And you would literally ride on the back of this trailer shooting the car shot. That way the actor's not actually driving, because it's illegal to actually shoot an actor driving a real car while the camera's rolling and might be obscuring their vision. They can kind of get away with it in reality TV because they're usually using GoPros and the cameras are kind of hidden. But when you're using big cameras like this, it's a lot less discreet and a lot harder to hide. But there's a thing called poor man's process where, let's say you're doing a nighttime driving scene and you just have a completely dark environment that you're shooting in. You would just take a light, spin it around on the top of a light stand, and it would simulate like driving by a street light, or having another car's headlights kind of go into your car. By having all these lights moving and hitting the people inside the car, even though the car's not going anywhere, it's just black all around them. That's called poor man's process for shooting an interior car scene. And I know that completely has nothing to do with our exterior lighting demo today, but the way that you would make a lot of that moving light work is the same way that we're doing this right now, is just loosening the top knob here and then just spinning it around. And again, you can even see, like if you were to look at the monitor over there, you can just see that the light's just kind of oscillating off of our dummy's face. It could look like there's a train passing by over here and light is either bouncing off of it or shining through it as it's going down the track, and it's affecting him in intermittent variables. But yeah, that's a much smaller single person setup. So now all of a sudden you have a camera on a tripod that's already framed and ready to go. You've got your diffusion, you've got your bounce set, and you're in front of the camera acting your heart out, and you don't have to have anybody else there to see it. So that is the activity of a true auteur. And when I went to film school, everybody was kind of trained to be an auteur, and that's not always a good thing. But like, for example, if there were 20 people in the class, there were 20 projects due. We weren't encouraged to work as a crew or work as a group. We weren't taught to stay in your lane, and we weren't taught to function as an actual crew on a real life set would. So when I worked on my first real set, it was complete culture shock for me because it was not what I learned when I was in school, and I felt ill prepared. And that's coming out of a university. I went to OCC, but I can't blame them because they're a community college. Then I went to Cal State Fullerton, and I did not learn any better there. So, but one of the cool things about our program here is if you do take the film production classes or the TV production classes, we train you to be employable, to know what to expect the first time you set foot onto a real set, to not feel like the odd person out or like, I went to film school for how many years for this? Like, really? I don't feel like I know anything. We teach you what you need to know to survive. We want to make you successful. You know, maybe you'll determine after doing it for a few months or a year that it's not for you and you want to move on. That's cool, but at least it won't be for lack of proper training. You know, and if it takes workshops like this, things on the side to be able to supplement what you're learning in your normal classes, or even if this isn't something that you would normally pick up on, like let's say you really want to focus on TV and this isn't something that we would teach in TV, but if you're doing single camera television production like Walking Dead or any of the streaming content that's out there, it's shot very much like a movie. With single camera, it's not going to be in a sound stage, it's going to be out with proper cinema cameras like this. So no longer is this just the realm of cinema and movies. This is really what a lot of streaming and TV is too. So we just want you to be prepared for all of it so that no matter what the industry throws at you, you'll be able to adapt and work through it. So with that, that sounds like a good wrapping up point. But I will take any more questions if you have them. And like I said, I encourage you to be hands-on and play with the gear if you want to while you're here. No pressure one way or the other though.